I keep thinking as I'm talking about near-death experiences, I'm just blinded by a series of lights around me. And they say in the near-death experience, don't they, go towards the light or go away from the light. And funny enough, I was just discussing with a friend of mine who's in the audience about the fact that the film Poltergeist was filmed in this area or was based in this area. And I recall that film from the 1980s and wasn't the same theme, was the light was dangerous, and if you went towards the light, there was a problem. Right, so what I'm going to be doing here is something quite different, and I'm going to be taking you through the science behind near-death experiences, because those of you who have read my books or are aware of my work know that I very much work upon the diktat of a guy called Marcello Trui, who is a Danish-Italian philosopher. And he very much came up with this very profound statement where he stated that extraordinary claims demand extraordinary proofs. And this is where I'm always writing about, and this is the central theme of my writing. I always say to people, I'm not channeling this information from the planet Tharg. I'm not an experiencer myself. I'm somebody who is intrigued and fascinated by extraordinary human experiences. But I want to understand what extraordinary human experiences are what are taking place there. Now, the skeptics will turn around and say they are just hallucinations. But as you'll discover from this presentation, that the word hallucination is somewhat arbitrary as to what we mean by an hallucination in the first place. And what I'd like to do is to give you guys a position to go back to your skeptical friends who will turn around to you and say, what have you been doing for the last long weekend? And you'll say, we've been talking about UFOs and aliens and abductions and other things. And they'll say, oh, that's a load of nonsense. You can then cite some of the work I'll be talking to you about and tell them, go and read the academic papers and then tell me it's nonsense. And it is quite important here that we are at the vanguard of a lot of the work that's being done at the moment. And science is now waking up to the fact that the mystery of consciousness, and indeed the mystery of the existence of anything, is of phenomenal interest and phenomenal importance. Now, what I'll be talking about here are some material from my latest book called, surprisingly enough, Near-Death Experiences. I'm phenomenally original in my titles of my books. And in the book, which came out on November the 4th, I think it was, in the United States last year, and came out in April in the UK, this book is my attempt to, again, do the science of near-death experiences. Now, because I can't see the audience, I can't necessarily do a straw poll, so I'm assuming that some of you may know what a near-death experience is, but I'll just very quickly explain. A near-death experience is effectively when somebody is close to death, either through an accident, through illness, or any other series of circumstances, where they suddenly go into what we technically know as an ASC, which is an altered state of consciousness. And in that altered state of consciousness, there are various things that take place, and these were first categorized by a guy called Raymond Moody way back in the 1980s, after he had come across the experiences of a surgeon called Ritchie. And basically he said that what tends to happen is there tends to be certain traits and consistencies that happen in near-death experiences. And some of them include, as I've said before, going towards a light, seeing a light, floating outside of your body, encountering non-human intelligences, which are basically known as the beings of light, and then specifically one entity, which is known as the being of light. There is a sense of a slowing down of time, and the way perception just slows down. There's also something called the panoramic life review, the idea that you see your life flash before your eyes. And there's a number of others as well, which we'll touch on as we go along. But the interesting thing about this is that these reports of these experiences didn't start in the 1980s. They have been known for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. They have been reported throughout history. So clearly, whatever the phenomenon is, it's real. In a very loose definition of what we mean is real, in that it is consistent and therefore has a reality external of ourselves. So it is a natural phenomenon. The question is, and the question I've always asked is, well, why have we evolved to have near-death experiences? What is the point of evolution developing this particular set of circumstances in the human brain at the point of death? Now, just going back in time, you may be surprised to know that the earliest reference in writing to a near-death experience is 2,000 or 3,000 years BC. And it was cited in a Greek myth called the myth of And a gentleman was on the battlefield, and he describes that after he had technically been killed on the battlefield, he found himself floating outside of his body, he found himself going to this other place, he met people that had died, and then he came back again. And throughout history this goes on. And in my new book, I go through the anthropology of it. I argue and give evidence that it's been right across the world. It's not just a Western thing either. It's not just a European thing. It's found across all civilizations. So clearly there's something here extraordinary going on. But what we're going to be talking today is about the science of it. Now, many years ago, I came across, well, just as a background story, I decided way back in 1998, 1999 to write a book. And I didn't know what I was going to write about, but I just had this incredible need to write a book. I'd always wanted to do so throughout the years. And I had a fairly successful business contract. I work as a business consultant, or used to, I'm now retired, but used to work as a business consultant. And I'd done a fairly good series of contracts, and I had sufficient money to take a year out to write a book. And what I did was, I decided literally from January of 2000, January the 1st, 2000 to the 31st of December 2000, I would take that time out and write a book. But I didn't know what the hell I was going to write about. I had no idea. Now, I have spent all my life been interested in extraordinary human experiences. I studied human experiences at university. I studied the sociology of religion, the sociology of language. I did psychology and statistics at postgraduate level. But I didn't know what I was doing for all those years. And what I wasn't aware of was that I was amassing information over all those years to write this book. Now, any people who know me know this, that I have quite a peculiar mind. I don't have full eidetic memory, but I'm pretty close. So if I read something, even if I read it 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I still remember it. And at times I can actually close my eyes and read down the page to find the references, which means it's a useful talent if you're a writer, because it means that if you start to go along on a certain tangent, you'll suddenly remember something you'd read from a totally different field of inquiry. And that's why my books are different to many people's books, because literally I go everywhere, from quantum mechanics to neurology to neurobiology to astronomy to history to art history to music to films to movies. So in my books you'll find all of this in there, and it seems to rationally come together in some way. But one of the things when I started writing the book, and I'll just very quickly tell you how the book started. I was sitting in front of my computer screen thinking, what am I going to write about? And suddenly I had a really strange sensation. And what happened was my lips started to tingle, then the end of my fingers started to tingle. And I realized that I was falling into what is known as a migraine aura. Now, anybody who's in the audience who has classic migraine, by that I mean migraine that sometimes doesn't even end up in a headache. You have an aura state, and it's a pre-warning, it's a prodrome, pre-warning of the fact at some stage in the future you're going to have a damn nasty headache. But one of the phenomenon that always accompanied me when I had an aura state was profound feelings of deja vu. It was kind of something that came part of it, this recognition of where I was. And I suddenly thought, I have sat in front of this computer screen, looking out over, I lived in a place called Horsham in West Sussex in the UK, and I'd done it before. I knew I'd done it before. And when the aura state finished, I knew at least the first subject matter I needed to pursue, which was deja vu. What was deja vu? And if we get time later, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But effectively, that's how it started. And then from deja vu, I got into the neurology of deja vu. And from the neurology, I started reading about brain chemistry. And I started to become fascinated. And I started to expand out from deja vu. And I came across this paper that had been written, just to be correct, in 1997, so a couple of years, or 2 or 3 years before. But effectively, the original paper he did was in 1996, and it was a paper written by a guy called Carl Jansen, who was at the time working at the Maudsley Hospital in London. And he was quite fascinated by the similarities that people reported when they took a substance called ketamine. Now, ketamine was a horse tranquilizer, but it's now used in medical purposes for human beings as well. But at that time, it had become very popular as a recreational drug. And I actually, at that time, knew 1 or 2 people who'd taken this substance. And when they described it to me, they said it was really weird. They felt that time had just slowed down. And they felt that they had been in the ketamine trip environment for hours, days, or weeks. But as far as the people around them were concerned, they'd only been stirring for a few minutes. But they'd been away for an amazing amount of time. Now, I get a phone call one afternoon. I get a phone call from one of my business associates. And she is a lady that owns her own recruitment consultancy in West Sussex. And she said, Tony, I have a vacancy for you. There's a business contract that I think you might be interested in. And I said, yeah, I'm not really interested at the moment because I'm taking a year out to write a book. And of course, the inevitable question to that, as soon as you ask that, somebody will turn around and say, what are you writing about? And I turned around and I said, well, I don't really know, which I thought really impressed her beyond words. And I said, I really don't know, but I'm really interested at the moment in certain neurological effects in the brain and the effect of certain neurotransmitters in the brain, which I'll explain in a second. But I'm also an area I'm interested in at the moment is altered states of consciousness that take place, specifically altered states of consciousness that are related to the sensations felt by people. And at that stage, I'd realized that also as a bit of an addition of information, I'd also discovered that people experience temporal lobe epilepsy get even more powerful deja vu sensations than I was having. So I just mentioned in passing to this lady about I was interested in temporal lobe epilepsy. She goes really quiet and she said, okay, let's meet up at the Copthorne Hotel near Gatwick Airport and we'll discuss the vacancy. And so I go to the hotel a couple of days later to meet her. And she said, I've been through your CV and I think you're too senior for the vacancy, but the reason I wanted to talk to you was that I've recently been diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy. And she said, and I couldn't talk about it at work, but she said, it's the most extraordinary experience I've ever, thing that's ever happened to me. And I said, well, why? What happened? And what she told me was absolutely unbelievable. She said that she was, and there's a good friend of mine in the audience who also experiences temporal lobe epilepsy, and he'll be aware of these effects anyway. But she said that she had gone to see, she had a business appointment at this company, and they were in the business canteen. And while they were in the canteen, the lady that she'd had the business meeting with went over and bought a pot of tea for the two of them. And the lady picks up the pot of tea, puts the 2 cups either side, and starts to pour the tea into my friend. I call her Margaret. Margaret's cup. Margaret then explained to me she felt a snap over her left ear. And the lady had stopped moving. And she's going. And she thought, this is ridiculous. Actually created by the pineal gland. Now, this then asks us some very interesting questions because we know from esoteric traditions and religious